All right, we'll get started here in just a moment as everybody files in. Okay, well, we are ready to get started. We're 2 minutes past start time. It's a pleasure to welcome everybody to this grain webinar today, where we're going to really dig in on the value proposition, latest and greatest insights around building biochar markets, and in particular with a lens to scale. And we've got a really robust dialogue in place. My name is Jason Dodier. I'm the co-founder and chief commercial officer of Grain Ecosystem, and I will be guiding us through the morning or evening, afternoon, wherever in the world you're calling in from, festivities. And I will be joined today by Myles Gray, Executive Director of the US Biochar Initiative, and Bernardo del Campo, the CEO of Arti, technology provider. And with that said, let us get started with the agenda. So let's go into the first slide of our discussion here. And we're going to start by highlighting where we left off. So for many of you that attended our first webinar session, we did a high-level demonstration on the platform and Grain. We walked through the different elements about what Grain does, how we support product developers, and how we ultimately help achieve end goals. Grain is an ecosystem for a reason. And one of the things I said in that talk many, many months ago, and we continue to double down on, is starting smart isn't a strategy. It's the foundation for success. So the whole point of Grain and the reason we exist as a company is to be deliberate and fanatical about the first steps of the process to minimize risk, maximize opportunity, and set the tone for, as we like to say, unstoppable progress. Now, when you think about the tool and how it exists today, we built out Grain and continue to build out Grain. You'll see a number of net new features to help project developers start out to win the game before it begins. Because success in any business is rarely accidental. It's built on disciplined preparation, especially when the urge to act is strong. So the goal of Grain is to take you on a path, understand the waste that you've got, and position you for success. And with that, we'll advance and take a look at some of the underlying elements of what we're going to be announcing coming forward. And the first piece is the Knowledge Hub. So continuing on the theme of ecosystem, ecosystems thrive through connection and interdependence. So every element that's part of the Grain ecosystem plays a vital role. And a lot of that comes from many of you that are on this call today that are providing material and insights and data to help us all collaborate as a rising tide lifts all ships and energy flows where attention goes. So we're trying to put all of the energy and efforts we have into making this Knowledge Hub best in class. In this Knowledge Hub, you're going to find materials related to feedstock sourcing, eligibility information, acceptable end uses, contract templates, which are really critical. We're going to talk a little bit more about the role of contracts and how contracts can enable scale through a process. We've got information from other partners like Ariel Green looking at technology performance insurance, and you're going to see full recaps from Grain key events. One of them notably, which we were very proud to partner with, the US Biochar Initiative, first of its kind, our climate stocktake Biochar Revolution event during New York City Climate Week. And you're going to have a lot of information there related to that. In addition, for those that have been following our Grain Ecosystem LinkedIn page and recent posts, we just announced our Grain Ecosystem Investor Series, where I've had the privilege of moderating and working with investors across the capital stack to explore their strategies, approaches to investing, with a lens towards, obviously, biochar, revenue streams, waste to value economic drivers, and what kinds of things they're looking for, such as technology, agreements, and execution. Many of these things, as I said, we're going to touch on a little bit more in detail during the talk today, but those are really critical value drivers and things that you're going to be able to find when you get access and engage with the Knowledge Hub. From there, we are unleashing our equipment matching tool. One thing that I think is really important to highlight here, the right tool guided by the right levels of purpose and inputs with a focus on outputs not only transforms effort into impact by matching the right resources to the right needs, but when you think about the role of biochar in particular, it's no different than what we saw in the rise of energy as a service and microgrids and renewables. If you make the wrong decision when it comes to technology, it's going to be an impediment to efficiency. It's going to hurt your positioning when it comes to maximizing value, protecting cash flows, and ultimately the communities that you're going to be working with and solving tough problems. This is the core of it. And we're honored to partner. One of our partners is already. Bernie's going to talk a little bit later about how they're working with grain in the lens of the equipment matching tool. But we're really proud of what we've built. And what we've seen is in 70% of the use cases, there are issues in the economics related to throughput, feedstock type, scale potential, location. So it's really critical to get this right from the get-go and ensure that you're understanding all of the inputs and output drivers that are most important to the long-term impacts of your project. Additionally, as many of you might know, we've tried to really scale and drive flexibility into the eligibility matching process. 3 years ago, when we had the early seeds for grain, one of the things that really made us uneasy was when we talked to project developers all over the world, and there was the impression of believing they were eligible for a particular methodology and operating, spending time and critical capital under the guise of working within that methodology type. With grain, we've done a really, really rigorous process and work protocol to ensure that the project developer has the power in their hands to ensure they're modeling sequential analysis against the different eligibility checkers. Because at the end of the day, we are trying to provide the tools and autonomy to act, adapt, and innovate, and transform the implementation into a long-term creator of lasting change. In order to do that, you have to ensure that you're picking the right methodology and standard. And for us, robust eligibility standards like those from Puro and Verra, Isometric, and Climate Action Reserve, these are the foundation of trust. And they're going to ensure that biochar projects are going to deliver measurable and lasting climate benefits, many of which Myles is going to talk about momentarily when we look at end-use markets. But these clear science-aligned criteria aren't just rules. They're going to be catalysts for innovation and driving transparency and impact. And at Grain, our job is to get you started on the journey and ensure you're picking the right standard for your project. And that's part of the value proposition, is ensuring you can look and test against Isometric or Verra or Puro in a way that is low risk, maximizes your time, and helps you get where you need to go. And if you're not eligible, we're going to help you try to figure out how you could become eligible or potentially uncover or unearth blind spots that you might have missed in the process going forward. Now, before I turn it over to my esteemed colleague, starting with Grain and engaging with these tools is very simple. GrainEcosystem.com. Join the ecosystem. If you're a developer, there's a developer link. If you're an investor, there's an investor link. Create your account and log in. First 20 signups get a Grain mug. And I'm also enjoying delicious biochar infused coffee. So definitely talk to us. Want to help you out there. Excited to get engaged post discussion today. And with that, I am going to prepare the stage and hand this over to my partner in crime, who I've had the privilege of traveling around the country with to have this discussion on end-use markets. As I said earlier, he's the program director of USBI. And really the way that Myles is helping us think through making really critical decisions and understanding end-use applications has been transformative just in the last couple of months. As I said earlier, at our event during Climate Week, we got to look at a lot of end-use applications, companies like Davy Tree and Lafarge and many others that talked about how they're implementing biochar from an end-use perspective. So without further ado, end-use markets, I'm going to hand the floor over to Myles Gray for him to take it from here. Myles, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jason. And I'm going to share my screen quickly here. Hopefully it'll go smoothly. And I'll hop right into my slide deck. And it looks like it is working. All right, great. Well, really appreciate you putting this program together, Jason, and always great to work with you. I'll be giving a little bit of an intro to what the USBI Biochar Initiative is, but really focus on developing markets to scale biochar as a carbon removal technology. That's the perspective that we take from USBI, is that biochar is this incredible carbon removal technology, but at this point, the largest obstacle to growing the market and growing production and use of biochar in the United States and beyond the United States as well, is really developing markets for the physical products. So US Biochar Initiative, we are a 501c3 dedicated to increasing the production and use of biochar in North America. The organization has been around for about 14 years now. And over that time, the organization has done a lot of different things. And as we move forward, we're really going to be focusing more on that market development component. We will be focused on some of the other things we do too, particularly developing standards for biochar, providing technical support for producers. We're also going to continue our annual conference, and the next conference, just if you haven't heard yet, is in mid-September in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So really looking forward to that. We have a great set of partners on the ground in Minneapolis, largely driven by the Minnesota Biochar Initiative Group, which is probably the most well-developed and thriving regional biochar organization in the United States. And then we also engage a little bit in the carbon dioxide removal space, but as I'll discuss a little bit, that part of the biochar industry is in some ways thriving as compared to some of the other parts of the industry. So before we jump into markets, I want to try and focus in on one particular point. And the high level here is that you really need to consider biochar as a system rather than a single product, particularly when it comes to things like carbon removal. So just at a high level, most biochar production companies have at least two revenue streams. There are those that are over on the right. So you're using pyrolysis or gasification here in the middle to produce gas, carbon removal, and physical biochar. Now that gas, that can be used to provide multiple benefits. A lot of times it's heat or electricity, but there are companies using that material to produce fuels, particularly marine fuels, some chemicals in terms of using it as a chemical precursor. There are ways to create hydrogen from that process as well. Then there's this carbon removal piece, and those are primarily monetized today as these credits, and they kind of tend to be in the $100 to $400 per ton of biochar range today. Sometimes a little bit outside that range, but that's pretty typical. And most companies right now are purchasing those as offsets, but there's no reason you couldn't retain those in your own value chain to sort of achieve some amount of value chain decarbonization as well. And we're seeing that a little bit. And then there's the physical biochar. And the reason I bring this image up isn't really to dig into those different revenue streams. It's more actually to point out that because biochar is this holistic approach to production, it really needs to be viewed in a systems perspective, particularly around that carbon removal piece. Biochar, I think to date, has been a little bit of the dark horse of the CDR space. And I think part of that is because it produces a lot of different things. It's not just a carbon removal technology. So if all you're looking at is the CDR component, oftentimes biochar won't rise to the top. For instance, there are organizations that have concerns around the conversion effectiveness of going from feedstock carbon to CDR carbon. And I totally understand their perspective, but it only really makes a whole lot of sense. That criticism falls away if you really look at this more holistic approach and consider all the other benefits of biochar. So it's just something that I try and point out regularly, is that we really need to be viewing biochar from a systems perspective and not solely as a CDR technology, because it's a whole lot more than that. Now, another point I want to make is just on the fact that biochar is typically decoupled from its credit, from its CO2 removal credit. And that's important for a couple of reasons, but I'll get to one of them. So right now we're seeing that these CDR credits, they're primarily being sold to technology companies and companies that can really prioritize credit quality over price. These tend to be companies that, first off, have relatively low value chain emissions. So they don't have a lot of levers they can pull in their own value chain. because most tech companies, a lot of their emissions are going to be scope 2 from electricity. So they don't have a whole lot of ability to change the products they source to reduce their carbon. And they typically also have a whole lot of profit per unit carbon emission. So those companies, they're really prioritizing credit quality over price, and they're willing to pay these relatively high prices for CO2 credits, kind of $100 to $200 per ton of CO2. Now, the physical biochar today is almost always separated from the credit. And the price for that is pretty variable. It can go anywhere from $200 to $600 a ton. But those buyers, they're using it in multiple value chain types. Right now, it's primarily agricultural, industrial value chains. And those companies, a lot of those companies, frankly, aren't even considering carbon abatement costs right now. And when they are, they probably have a much lower marginal cost of carbon abatement than $100 to $200 a ton. So those companies are pretty happy to, have technology companies in some ways subsidize the cost of that physical product. But one of the things I want to point out is that all of the CDR credit frameworks for biochar, all of them account for emissions from feedstock sourcing, from biochar production, and from biochar shipping in the carbon dioxide removal credit. So when you've sold that CDR credit separately, when you consider physical biochar in the value chain, it really becomes a zero carbon material. And while zero is not a negative number in your value chain, zero is pretty powerful when it comes to value chain accounting. It means you can use biochar in place of other materials, and every other material has some amount of carbon associated with its production and use. So zero can be a pretty powerful number. And the point is that you can actually achieve a lot of value chain decarbonization without purchasing the credit. So a really important point there. And just to summarize this piece before I jump into the markets, looking at value chain decarbonization on a high level, there's really three ways that biochar can fit in. First is that conversion of biomass to biochar. That's where this CDR credit comes in, and those are the 5 existing methodologies are on the right. Most companies, as I said, are selling these CDR credits as a credit to a third party, but you could embed them to reduce your value chain emissions. We're seeing that a little bit right now in the concrete space, that concrete companies are interested in sort of embedding those attributes, those carbon removal attributes into the value chain. There's also utilization of pyrolysis gases. So oftentimes that's heat or electricity today, but there's companies really pushing the envelope into liquid fuels, things like SAF, marine grade fuels. There's a lot going on in that space, and I think there's a lot of potential there. And then finally is the use of biochar in products and in agriculture. And one of the key sort of pathways to decarbonization in products is just replacing high carbon materials with biochar. So again, you can replace a high carbon product like peat or perlite in potting media with a zero carbon material for biochar where the credit has been sold separately. That's a win. There's also a lot of other benefits like reducing nitrogen use in agriculture and reducing soil or GHG emissions. And that nitrogen piece is really important. That's one of those things that emissions from nitrogen agriculture are one of the greenhouse gas emissions that shows up on the total pie chart of global emissions. It's in that it's one of those slices of the pie that gets labeled. And anything that gets labeled on that pie is a pretty big slice. So now moving into markets. So I just want to bring up this slide. For those of you not aware, we led a project with the International Biochar Initiative last winter to complete a global survey. We got about 1,000 responses from around the world. And I'm highlighting this slide, which is what are the primary challenges or obstacles for the industry? These are the top 5 responses. And, low awareness of biochar came out number 1. If I could have done this again, I'm not sure I would have included that because I'm not really sure what to take away from low awareness. But what I can take away from this are the 2 that I've highlighted. Insufficient market demand for physical biochar and lack of product standards and specifications. And I contend that these are essentially the same issue. Product standards and specifications are so critical to developing those markets. And this really focused for us as an organization that this is the path forward for USBI, is to really hammer on this market demand for physical biochar and also building out those standards to support that demand. So looking at standards, in terms of the background, there are existing standards for biochar. They're currently privately held by Carbon Standards International. They're based on German laboratory standards, which are DIN standards. And that's led to a major issue in the United States. There's very few laboratories that offer biochar analysis services. They have backlogs, and most other labs don't have the capacity to implement these German standards. So our approach, we're leading a process to develop an American national standard, an ANSI standard for the analysis and characterization of biochar. We're starting on this kind of characterization piece, developing out a usable set of analytical techniques that the United States labs can effectively implement. That's a major bottleneck right now. That process is underway, and we expect to release that standard by Q2 2025. There will be a public comment period before that, but we're running this through a very formal public process through ANSI, the organization. So really looking forward to getting that work done. It's been a lot of effort on our side. We may update that program in the future to include things like end use standards. But what we've heard a lot from the industry today is that end use standards, for instance, thresholds and ranges around different end uses, we've heard that a lot from biochar companies that they're not that interested in those right now. They'd rather sort of explore their own market development and explore their own product market fit without a whole lot of guardrails around kind of thresholds and ranges around products. We're also, final point is that we are engaged in a process to develop an international standard, an ISO standard, and that effort is underway. It's likely to be a fairly long process because ISO is a fairly slow moving process compared to ANSI. So that could be years away. We are engaged in that, and I think that's a really important effort as well. So jumping into markets, I'm going to focus on 5 markets where we are dedicating a pretty significant amount of our time. First off is biochar as a soil amendment. I think we all understand the general sort of scope of what this is. Really, we're talking about using relatively high rates of biochar applied, typically using something like a compost spreader, as you can see, and then incorporated into the soil. A lot of the value proposition here is around increased crop yields, reduced water and nitrogen, increased drought resilience, and here in the United States is the potential to actually get some cost share payments from NRCS, which can offset most or all of that cost for a grower. What we've heard, though, in terms of that program, is that yes, that program exists, but honestly, a lot of NRCS staff internally don't really know much about that program, and they don't really know much about biochar. So that's what we're seeing as a key obstacle. A farmer or an organization will propose biochar to NRCS, and NRCS either says no or says, we're not really sure what you mean. So a big part of what we're doing in this next year, we're starting a Train the Trainer program. And this will be led by our new Soil and Agriculture Director, which will be coming on in December. And we're really going to be leading a program to set up in-person training events around the country targeted at NRCS staff, but also some of these other adjacent organizations, conservation districts, university extension, crop advisors, state departments of agriculture, really to help increase awareness of biochar and its use in soil among those organizations that help farmers understand the path forward. So it's a really big initiative. We're launching it this year. We'll probably have the first one in upstate New York. And then the next few are Virginia, Washington, and California. We've got these in the works, and a big part of this is trying to network with and pull together local partnerships. So a pretty key initiative. Next is biochar enhanced fertilizers. I kind of view this as the long-term way that biochar will be used in the agricultural sector. Biochar as a soil amendment is a really important tool, but it's hard and it requires a lot of effort on the part of a farmer. So biochar enhanced fertilizers kind of flip that a little bit, because the real benefit here for a farmer in terms of using biochar is that you can apply this material without any change to equipment, without any change to practice. You're applying it with a typical fertilizer spreader or fertigation system, and you're using at the typical time. And it can reduce the total fertilizer cost because these products increase nitrogen use efficiency. So you can reduce your total fertilizer cost by using these without any particular addition and effort. And this is a little bit earlier stage. So in this space, we're really focused more on this R&D phase, trying to network and coordinate universities, biochar companies, fertilizer companies. We're really trying to bring that network together and support some of this research and connect the dots. There's a ton here, but there's also a decent amount of work to be done. And what we want to help push is we want to get some major fertilizer companies to champion these products. If we can get to that point, I think the biochar industry will really thrive. The next one is one that's kind of dear to my heart, which is stormwater management. I spent about 7 years working on stormwater green infrastructure and used biochar on a lot of different projects here on the United States West Coast. The value proposition here really is improving pollutant removal for contaminants in stormwater runoff and increasing infiltration, which is a big goal of these systems, and also just improve plant health. It might not seem like a big deal, but in these vegetated systems, in a lot of ways, these are plant torture facilities. They typically plant the plants in really sandy soil, and they get periodically inundated and flooded every time it rains, but then they're sand, so they dry out really quickly. So they really torture the plants, and biochar can dramatically improve the plant health in these systems. And that matters because when the plants look terrible in these systems, it costs cities money. Neighbors complain, and the city has to go out and spend labor, which is the most expensive thing you can spend is labor. So they're sending out crews to these and replanting all the plants on a regular basis. Here in Portland, Oregon, last year, something like 15% of all the plants in these systems died because we had a pretty significant drought last summer. It's a major cost. And in this space, we're really focused on developing out guidance manuals so that stormwater designers can use these manuals as a justification for why they're using biochar. That's a big part of this industry, and I've seen it firsthand in multiple projects. Designers really need manuals to be able to specify biochar. Next is horticultural potting media. This is a space where we're seeing a lot of growth in the biochar space. And one of the things that's happening in this space is that potting media companies, the Scotts of the world, and others, are looking for replacements to peat. Peat is a material that's mined in Canada from wetlands. It's an incredible potting media, but it's really environmentally damaging and has a pretty significant carbon footprint. So the value proposition here is really just to be able to replace that material without impacting performance. And we're seeing that pretty clearly, that you can replace most or all of that peat with biochar, with certain types of biochar. And in this space, we're really coordinating with some of these major players to get demonstrations and applied research done so that they can better understand the types of biochar that work and how best to use those different types of biochar. So we think that we can get there where we get some guidance and specifications out to the biochar industry so that the industry itself can really better understand how to engage and what types of biochar are going to make sense for horticultural growing media. And then the final one, quickly, is concrete and asphalt additives. This is a space where we're seeing a lot of traction and a lot of interest. The benefit here mostly, I think, is reduced embodied carbon. So we're seeing concrete companies actually, and biochar companies that engage in the concrete space, really embed those CDR benefits, either credits or just attributes, into that product to reduce the total carbon, embodied carbon of that material. There's also groups that are pushing the envelope on sort of high performance concrete, particularly lightweight and high performance concrete. So a lot of space here. This is clearly a climate relevant market, and it's one where we're really engaged as well. So that's essentially my pitch. And just at a high level, we are really interested in collaborations with organizations to get some of these projects on the ground, and happy to talk through any of that with anybody who's interested. But also we'll be kind of announcing a lot of these more significant initiatives over the next 6 months.
Thank you so much, Myles. Lots to unpack. Certainly for many of the folks that have made note in the chat, yes, this webinar is being recorded, and you will get access to look at everything that's been presented and obviously pause the screen and dig in. Couple of things I want to highlight, and then I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. Make sure you're booking your travel now for the week of September 15th. As Myles said, I mean, what the group in Minnesota has done in the bio time with Jim Doughton, all of them. And look, Minneapolis is a city that balances nature and innovation in a really unique way. They've got a vibrant downtown, they've got the beauty of the lakes, and they're leading from the front. I think that's really something that many municipalities across the country can learn from. So being there on the ground to experience this firsthand and meet these stakeholders, it's second to none. The other thing I just want to highlight really quick is it's so important. This is one of the things Myles and the team at USBI excel at, is the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So focus on biochar and drive out. It's not just a product. This is a holistic system that's sequestering carbon, enriching soil, and driving circular economy solutions. Myles talked about bridging traditional agricultural practices with future climate solutions, stormwater, cement, water retention, regeneration of agricultural lands, potting media. So biochar is embodying the power of closed loop thinking, enabling sustainable cycles of growth, renewal, and regeneration. So lots more to come. But Myles, that was really masterful to lay the groundwork. And for many people, I think this is their first time getting to see this presentation. And it certainly gets better every time that I see it. And I'm writing frantically, taking down notes as you talk. Now, with that said, Bernie Del Campo is the founder and CEO of ARDI. ARDI stands for Advanced Renewable Technology International. This is a company that is specializing and is best in class in advanced pyrolysis equipment for biochar production. Bernie's a PhD in mechanical engineering. His work is focused on renewable energy, biomass conversion, and carbon sequestration. And under his leadership, and I can attest to this, having spent a lot of time with Bernie, ARDI has become one of the most recognized and innovative solutions in biochar and sustainable technologies. And we at Grain thought this audience would benefit immensely from getting to hear from him firsthand about what he's seeing and the work ARDI is doing in the space. And with that, Bernie, honored to share the stage with you. And please take over the floor. And Bernie, you are on mute. It wouldn't be a webinar without somebody talking on mute. So there you go.
Absolutely, there you are. And thank you. And apparently the battery of my computer, mouse and keyboard just went out. So it's always at the right time. So we are here. Don't worry. I'll do it without the
This is
mouse.
authenticity at its finest right now.
Yes. This is already troubleshooting at the last time. I'm sorry, guys. Well, no, fantastic. First of all, I would like to thank Jason and Grain for the incredible work that they're doing to put all this together, for the audience to be here, because there's so much to, decipher, to put together in our industry. There's so many parts here, and Myles and the USBI for the impeccable assistance that they have throughout all the industry, helping us out navigating all the different things, clients, consumers, machines, the knowledge that it has been gathering and distributing throughout all of us. So special thanks to both of you for the incredible work that you guys are doing, and for the audience for being here, because honestly, we do it for the audience, and we do it for the industry, we do it for the environment. And when we talk, we feel the power from all of you guys. So thank you for being here. Well, I'm going to be talking from ARDI perspective, but in a casual way. I'm just going to show you guys along all these years things that we have found interesting to share, and most of them are, challenges, problems, variability, different needs from the industry. So again, here goes a little story with some pictures, and we're going to stop in a few of them. Okay, but basically, ARDI, we've been more than a decade working in the pyrolysis technology. We've done several other things, combustors, helping acidification, do all sorts of consultation, and we have learned a lot. But let me tell you, it's not enough. This industry is quite varied, and the needs are incredible. I like to say that what we do is challenge variability, and challenge variability with know-how. That's what we need to do along the industry. The first thing that we start to think, to think it more seriously was the industry that we faced 10, 15 years ago. A lot of kilns, a lot of, I would say, low technology implementations. And we saw the absolute need, if we need an industry, we need continuous systems. We need industrial equipment that it can be scaled up. Otherwise, what do you have? Inconsistencies of the product being made. We want to have on the specifications, and you guys heard Myles how important is getting those specifications right. Well, the different biochars that you can make from a machine, if you operate them differently, because today you have an operator, tomorrow you have an operator, in a kiln base, it's enormous. absolutely enormous. So the first thing is we need industrial machines. So with that is we need industrial machines that they're, I would say, cost efficient. They're not too expensive, but at the same time, you need all the technology because there's lots of motors, lots of things that the process does to get a good quality biochar and to meet those numbers that our clients need, our investors need, and so forth. So there on the left, I'm showing you guys a little kiln that we did. This is for a project in Nicaragua, which it was incredible. And these are founders of Arty. This is Juan and Matt and I. But the same thing is we saw a challenge. We went there, we faced it, we made some biochar, we got wonderful greenhouse gases data on soil. And then we say, well, you know what, why don't we go and try to industrialize this? So this is, the first machine that we put together. What we saw, they containerized the modularity of the system, something so critical, because every carbon developer, we sit down on a table and we start discussing about what is the project like. And then 6 months afterwards, we discuss the project again, and everything has changed. You know, we are managing waste. We are with all sorts of different opportunities that we need to face, and they change all the time. So the first thing that we said is, let's de-risk this. Let's make something modular that we can obviously automate, industrialize, modify, automate, and integrate into an industrial setting. Okay, so that's our machine. It's a container. We put it on boats, we put it on trucks, we put it on rails, and we move it all over the world. And we save a ton in commissioning, in assembly, in infrastructure. It's simple. It's simple. And there you have another one from another view. And we have been evolving. The box is the same, but the components and the heart has been changing. In every machine that we do, we learn. We learn and we learn. And every biomass that we run, we start getting data and then improving. Sometimes it's automation parameters, sometimes it's a little bit of hardware, sometimes it's how we structure and put this together. The same components, just rearrange it. And we get different biochars, different systems, and different numbers. And those are the things that I challenge all of you guys. You know, I sit with TAs and LCAs all the time. I see numbers all over. First of all, my humble opinion, but if they're too good, they're probably wrong. But then there are absolutely niches and very good opportunities for the industry to jump in. So let's dig into those and let's get the best numbers that we can. And I think Grain and our partnership with Grain is critical because there's so many components in this industrial setting that we need to put together. All these stakeholders working together for the same goal. And Grain, that platform that has developed, I think is the first thing that we need. Otherwise, we're not talking the same language. So let's structure this and organize all these cows that we have in our industry. Okay, that's a little bit of a take-home message for all of us. On Arty, what we have been doing is, you know, navigating through the biochar world. Okay, so the first thing that we try to tackle is the machines. We need not too expensive, cost-effective machines, industrial scales that it can be automated and they can produce biochar with a specific with a specification and continuously, and the same biochar or very similar, right? So there's a huge need. There still is. You know, all of us, we need to improve so much. You know, and don't get me wrong. But one other thing is, there's not a technology provider that feeds in every situation. I feel like there are many machines, and they're very good machines. Very others not so good. No, not so good machines as well. But it's very hard. We have so many biomasses and so many systems that, you know, it's not the same machine that will operate, that will be the best to operate in each of those conditions. But, you know, we can modify. There's a structure that we can implement and improve. But there's many technology providers, and many of them are suited for some biomasses and some situations, some others are not. So developers, the homework here is enormous. I've seen lots of projects with a lot of challenges and failing because just the machines, it's very hard for that biomass or for that situation of the requirements of the product. So the technology it's daunting, the needs for keep improving it and making it better. And going back to the variability, we do research and development. Why? Because this is a big platform. We have all these biomasses. Some biomasses have this much amount of carbon, this much amount of moisture, minerals, and all those biomasses, you need to turn them into the best product that you can. And like Myles was saying, you got two main products generally. You got biochar and carbon credits, and it don't necessarily go on the same path when you want to optimize. So there's a lot of understanding of, well, this is the economics, this is what we need to do, this is how we run the machines, and this is the best machine to get the best equation out of this, right? So the R&D, there's a lot to know. Do we improve, fixed carbon or carbon content, H2C? Okay, how does it impact the biochar production, the quantities, the type of biochar, and so forth? And then you start, adding, I would say, the other values that the biochar platform has, like electricity production or heat utilization or tipping fees. All those things are research. You start putting all those pieces together, and you have a different puzzle that you need to put together. So there's a lot of consultation R&D that needs to happen for the optimum system in those scenarios. We do biochar, a little bit of biochar, and then the carbon dioxide, we partner with many people and help them, lots of people, and we assist them, and in many cases we put them in contact with partners of us that they're great, and they're doing a great job in this market, and there's a lot that we all need to know, so again, how we rearrange all the stakeholders to work for that common goal, and we do a good job together. Well, I will show you here some improvements of our technology. One other, I would say, critical challenge that we have been working is how we scale up. The system that I showed you before, they do biochar, but then you need to get to those production levels, that carbon content, that H2C, that production, that economics, on the biochar production and let's say carbon credits, if you're focusing on those two. Well, the number one thing is how we make this produce more and make the technology more cost effective. Because if you start, plugging numbers into the Excel, you will see how important this is in the final IRR and the final approach to your clients and investors. So how do we do for improving the scale? In our case, what we did was we put parallel system, and here you can see a 5-train BPU, biochar production unit. Can we do it bigger? Yes, we have done, but we found that this is more cost effective, and again, there's different biomasses. Sometimes they work for one, sometimes they don't work for another one. With this, we feel that it's more reliable, higher throughput, and better suited for that particular scenario or many others. So we just put 5 into one container. And if you see there, we have 3 layers. This is a biochar production unit. It's not a pyrolyzer. Pyrolyzer is one of the components. But like what it was said before with the speakers, these are industrial settings that we need to put together, and we need to simplify. We review so many projects, and they have this much in an RTO, this much in a big dryer, this much in handling, this much in, and then they end up being several $1 million plus the pyrolyzer. So how critical is to simplify the system, get it down to its fundamentals, make it efficient, and then put everything in one container. And that's what we did. You put biomass here, and it grinds, it dries. Then afterwards, it pyrolyzes, and then it cools down, it goes into a bag. So you put the biomass here, and you get the biochar here. It's enormous. And we need to make it simple. Otherwise, we need millions of dollars, and then at the end of the year, you made 100 tons of biochar. Guess what? It won't pay the bills. So we're still, doing lots of changes, improving this system as we go. But we felt another enormous challenge is making it simple, integrated, and cost effective for the entire industry. Here is I would say a side view of the machine. And what I was telling you before, we'll have a grinder, we have a dryer. This dryer uses the same heat that we're wasting in the pyrolyzers, So again, you don't need natural gas, you need propane, you don't need all those things. You got plenty in the system. You just need to make it efficient. Then it goes down, you pyrolyze it, and here's where we do the cooking. And the same thing, different biomasses cook differently. And we do all sorts of rearranging of how we process, how we run this. We add and different hardware here and there just to make the best out of that pyrolyzer, to get more throughput, to get more carbon, to get more simplicity and less equipment. All these things are critical. We cook it, and we need to cook it well, and we need to cook a lot without breaking the system. We get to very high temperatures here, and if you do it wrong, you melt it. You can come over to Artie and I will show you all sorts of incredible things that we have done, breaking the machine. So you pyrolyze it, you cook it, and then you cool it, and then we quench it. We add some water, and then we put it in bags. And sometimes we add some grinders afterwards because the client need a specific biochar particle size, or we add some nutrients or whatever, microbes. So all this needs to be seen as a platform. And it's not making biochar, it's making everything works so you can make a good biochar and meet those numbers afterwards, okay? And this is what I was referring. We got 5 trains here that are working in parallel. So how important is to understand what we need, what we have, and how we make it there. We need to validate the biomass. This is incredible. So the biomass, like we all know, it varies. It varies with seasons. It varies how you manage it. It varies with the part of the plant that you're harvesting. So that's the number one challenge, is understanding the biomass that we have. And we emphasize so much throughout our relationships and our clients is you need to do R&D. You need to understand what you have. People say wood chip, and I receive so many different types of compositions of wood chips. That is incredible. So do the numbers good, do some runs, get the real numbers that you will get in that project. That's the number one take-home message from carbon developers or project developers. We have small electric systems that we can vary all sorts of things and get numbers, get data, get different biochar compositions. And from there, we bring it up to the large-scale machine. And we run it, and we do the same settings, and we get more numbers and better numbers, okay? But you need to understand what is the potential of that biomass, and you do it in small scale, How does it impact the LCA and the carbon credit and the cork ratio, whether you do this temperature or this temperature? There's some basic understandings that you need to have to put those numbers right. And then we go into large-scale trials. This is, before we sell a machine, we need to do large-scale trials. We need to validate the biomass that you have. We need to run them. We need to check sin emissions. We need to check on the carbon content, on the automation levels, on the throughputs, everything, on the challenges that we might have. We find challenges, at the site that we should have been working those challenges way before we even manufacture an equipment. So the large-scale trial is absolutely a necessity. It needs to be. Yes, they're wood chips, but doesn't matter. We need to run them. And the consultation services is exactly that. The variability that we have in the biomass, in the processing, in the biochar, you need to put all them together, put in a spreadsheet, and change it a lot, because you can change it a lot and it will change a lot. So you need to understand the sensitivity of all these numbers and parameters, do simulations and how that will impact everything, all the economics and performance and so forth. So there's a lot of consultation that I suggest all of you guys spend a lot of money, not with us, but with whoever you're using as a consultant, because there's a lot of things that you need to test and get numbers and see how they vary, and those are critical. This is just an example of things that we proud ourselves in Artie is the R&D. And these are examples of different biomasses that we run, different speeds, different temperatures, sometimes we do activations and we add chemicals and we do different grindings and we check how that impacts the product, the yields, the carbon content. And this is absolutely necessary, absolutely necessary. So we pride ourselves of being able to do this and to share all those numbers and the knowledge that we're creating with our clients. So with that, I'm going to thank you all for being here. And well, we're here to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Bernie, it's always wonderful to get not just context, but the visuals. And I do hope everybody gets a chance to spend some time on site live. There's nothing like seeing this stuff in person, in real time. Bernie, you made a lot of really vital points. You talked about varied components. The chaos of varied components, obviously, from that, we've seen it with Artie, you get the brilliance of structure, because these great things obviously aren't built with a single idea. It's coming from a combination of many perspectives, you have scientific reasoning, deductive reasoning, working with people all over the world. And obviously, as we, the three of us, know, when the stakes are the highest, like they are now, the lessons learned are the deepest. And the key thing is, how quickly do we make these critical reversible decisions and drive forward? And I want to make one more point, then I'm going to get to a couple of questions, because this is one of the most active Q&As I've ever seen in my 2 decades of being in webinars. I mean, it is absolutely going off right now, which is great. But I want to highlight one more thing, because obviously we had an election cycle recently. I do co-chair the market committee for our industry government group, and I've spent a lot of time in DC. This is a solution that transcends political divides. So when you think about the economic value and environmental challenges from farms to forests, biochar is a solution that is bridging these divides, and it's got a promise, intense promise, of economic opportunity and climate benefits, and the potential to drive growth and in parallel combat climate change. I think is going to unite everybody and bring a lot of people together. So the stakes are high, the economics are there. There's a lot of varied components and inputs, and that's what we're all here to do in different capacities. And it's been an honor to share the stage with both of you today. And one thing I just want to highlight to the group, and I'm going to ask the first question. We've made a commitment that we will put out a follow-on. So all the questions we haven't gotten to, and there's going to be a lot, we are going to address all of them and put a basically a follow-up, write-up, and maybe even a follow-on webinar to ensure every question gets answered. And there's a lot of questions, Bernie, related to the elements and aspects of the Artie technology that we can address separately offline. First question I want to flag, because I've seen 2 layers of this, and it's going to go to you, Myles, to start. What is the largest barrier to getting multinationals to adopt biochar in their supply chain? And how can the community help Grain, USBI, and Artie make this happen faster, especially for companies like ours that are part of large multinational supply chains? Myles, I know this is something you've spoken about a lot. Do you want to kick off on this one?
Yeah, I'll just say, clearly there's a chicken and egg situation here, but I would say we're getting closer to hatching than we have been to date. And one of the issues in the past has been that large multinational corporations, when looking at biochar, they've known about it for a long time. But when they look at the industry, when they've looked at it before 2024 at least, they've seen a lot of small scale producers that had quality and consistency problems, not problems, but just sort of inconsistencies around the product, but also lack of large scale supply. So for instance, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense 8 years ago for Nutrien or Yara to go develop a biochar enhanced fertilizer. Even if they developed some incredible product, they wouldn't actually be able to source the material to go produce that product. That's starting to change. And I think now is an enormous opportunity to continue to engage with those companies where they typically are. So in a lot of ways, what we're doing at USBI is trying to go get in front of those audiences at their own industries. And we're hoping to really be able to coordinate those companies. I think it will move forward a little faster now, but it has been an issue to date. And I think really just engaging with those companies where they are is one of the key pieces, and really understanding their specific needs. It's easy in the biochar space to say, yes, biochar solves this problem. But when you start to dig into what the problem looks like from the end user perspective, it's often pretty different. So really understanding it from the end user perspective, I think, is pretty critical.
And I'll add one point, and then I've got a question for Bernie. For us at Grain, we want to know the supply chain, where the waste sits. We're very connected in the corporate world. Obviously, one of the key things we're doing is helping to accelerate and drive capital from corporates into these projects. So we're here to help open the door and educate buyers in particular, understand the opportunity and the shareholder value related to the corporate value chain. So clear, great response on that one, Myles, and it's one that I know you're doing. There's a lot more to come on supply chain and insetting around decarbonization of biochar. Bernie, this question has come in a couple of form factors, but essentially, can you talk at a very high level about the throughputs for the 5 train? Does it put out syngas or amount of wood vinegar? How are the production gases treated? Just some high levels in terms of the outputs around the 5 train system, please.
Great. That's the number one question we get asked, because let me step back a little bit. The variability on the biomass is enormous. You get biomass that has 5 pounds per cubic feet, and you have others that have 45, 50. And it's a 10-fold difference sometimes between the density, the energy content, the moisture content. So it's very hard. But what I would say is, a good material. We can process, I would say, per train between 4 and 8 tons per train. So that's times 5, 20 and 20 to more. I like to start with 20 because, again, all the biomasses that I've seen, very, very few are ideal. So we start with numbers around there, and then with the large scale trial, we start improving them and then seeing where we can be. Okay. But it's so critical that the variability that we have to address with our machines is enormous, and putting a number there, it's so difficult. That's why we go through the whole consultation R&D step. But I will start with those numbers, and then we'll improve them as we go.
Thank you, Bernie. Yeah, that's obviously, you can see why that's one of the most prominent questions, and it's a critical one, and obviously a driver for the industry, also helping with the revenue streams to drive capital. Myles, this is very appropriate, especially given some of the work that you're doing going into 2025. Will USBI's Train the Trainer program include sessions or resources to help biochar producers connect with and educate NRCS and other organizations? This is a red hot topic, as we all know. What kind of insights can you give to this one?
Well, we certainly invite biochar organizations and companies to participate in those training events. And, one of the ways we're locating them actually has a lot to do with where we have kind of support from local partners. So that's a key part of this story, is like, that's where we're going to be targeting these, is where we can really get them done and done well. And that always relies on some partnerships. The trainings themselves are really going to be targeted mostly to agency staff, to really increase that knowledge level of the agency staff more than the biochar industry. But that's not to say that there's not a lot of learning that can be done in the biochar industry. One of the key pieces of this, and we have a significant amount of funding from ARS to do this, Agricultural Research Service, is to build a lot of this content and do some really high quality videography during these events to build out a much better sort of online toolkit through the Biochar Atlas, so that a lot of these training events will be available and converted into online training resources as well. So,
thank you so much for that, Myles. And with that, I do want to respect everybody's time. We are at the limit. I will say this webinar, first of all, is going to be made available. So we will send an email with a recap. You'll be able to watch it. You'll be able to share it. We have all of the questions that have been asked, and we will ensure prompt responses, especially for the individuals that have technical questions related to Artie. And I'll close by saying, while predictability can be comforting, and we see this happening in every industry across the stack, and I certainly spent a lot of my career working on unpredictable problems in energy as a service, both in Africa, Middle East, and Europe, and certainly here in the Americas. It's how we adapt to the unpredictable nature of these projects that's going to define our success. And what gives me a lot of hope and faith is not just the roles that Bernie and companies like Artie and certainly USBI and IBI, et cetera, are playing in the industry, but it's just the growth I've seen and the excitement, the engagement from leaders like yourselves that are here. This is one of the best attended webinars I've ever seen or been part of, which is fantastic. And each very challenge we're going to come across is going to be an opportunity to innovate, which is what we're doing here at Grain, and strengthen our capacity to overcome obstacles, to testing creativity and adaptability along the way. And with that, I thank you all immensely. I welcome feedback. And as we prepare for the next webinar in the series, we count on you to guide us. and help us to uncover the things that are most important. So I wish you all a great day and week ahead, and let's continue to expand and execute in the biochar space. Thank you again, Myles and Bernie, and everybody else that made this event possible today. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.